Welcome everybody to our third installment of our webinar series, A Guide to Storytelling for Corporate Learning. I'd just like to thank again everyone who's come along. We've already got 15 people who have come in as participants, and we have 5 panelists for you today. This is a really interesting topic, storytelling, and it's something that Teledec is has so much background and history in. So the first thing I'm going to do, as always, I'm going to introduce our panelists. First, the man of the moment, the person who is always presenting, is Kushal Bose. So Kushal he's a professional filmmaker and nuclear engineer, and he's been telling engineering and technical stories for the last 3 decades. He's committed to the deep learning philosophy of deep learning is really the core of what Teledec does. And because of this commitment to learning, he was awarded one of the top 100 global innovators in learning and development in 2021. And Kushal will be presenting for us again at the beginning of this webinar. Secondly, we have Subhasis Mukherjee. He's the managing director and leader of the insurance practice at Deloitte Consulting, Chicago. He has a master's degree in computer engineering from India and is part of the Deloitte US Consulting Group for core business operations. We have, again, Bahar. Bahar, as Kushal was saying earlier, if you came onto the webinar early, he is our CEO of Teledec India. And he is a computer engineer and has 2 decades of experience in the L&D industry and has deep learning in learning management systems, deep expertise, sorry, in learning management systems. We then have Mike Lin, who's a newcomer. Mike is an author, filmmaker, and management consultant based out of Chicago. And Mike adds tremendous value and experience to this conversation as a storyteller par excellence on many business topics and industries. And then we have Dr. TK Kuhn as well, who's coming, and he is an electrical engineer specializing in intelligent control systems and is the principal engineer in advanced technology group at Navistar, and especially related to artificial intelligence projects. So, incredible lineup again of industry experts. And now I will leave it to you, Kushal.
All right, let me jump into my presentation first.
Okay, Kushal, let me just give you the ability to share. 1 second. Okay. Okay, Kushal, you should be able to share now.
Let me get this on. All right, thanks a lot for coming. It's a very interesting topic that we will talk about. I'll try to wrap it up as soon as possible. I have a lot of slides that I have created for you guys, which is going to be available at the end of the session, and we'll give you the link where you can download it from. So I'm not going to go in details on every slide on this deck, but I want to hit the highlights from which you can get an idea. So So first of all, I want to emphasize the fact why we are here. Because I want to argue that there are 3 factors causing a paradigm shift in the corporate learning today. And what are these 3 factors? Number 1, COVID-inspired distance learning has become the de facto standard of learning environment globally today. That's a new challenge for most corporations. How do you take your existing content and make it suitable for distance distribution? Second factor that has caused a paradigm shift is the new technology, faster processors, mobile, tablet, service as a system, artificial intelligence. All of this is driving new horizons in distribution of content, streaming especially. And finally, the new audience that we are about to, we are including in our workforce. These three factors, I call it a perfect storm that really is going to be forcing the learning and development community to make radical changes of how they're training their people today. And today's presentation is all about what we have done for the last 35 years to most of these Fortune 500 companies who have come to us for different learning challenges, and how we were able to develop a story-based or a different type of interesting delivery of training for most of this corporation. We relied on a concept called deep learning from the very early on. Deep learning is a subject on its own, and we can deal with it later on. And in fact, I have in my website, I have a lot of write-ups and blogs on deep learning. But for the time being, I want to say that deep learning is something that is not superficial or memory-based learning. In today's learning environment, most corporations offer a training course, either online or offline or instructor-led, but then they do a certification test, assessment test, and when they pass, they're qualified and they know the subject. But in reality, the number of accidents, number of events, number of incidences have not really sharply fallen off in spite of our large billions of dollars investment in learning and development. So what's lacking is the learners really internalizing the content of the training. And that internalization is caused by deep learning. Science has proved it, and I'll come to that in a second. So in this presentation, we are talking about the basic foundation of deep learning, which is storytelling. And from the storytelling, we can really create a metaphor for learning delivery. So storytelling involves two sides of the brain, and science has already told us our brain is compartmentalized into left side and the right side, where the left side has the ability to comprehend logic, sequence, math, and all that. And the right side is creative side, imagination, thinking, intuition, visualization, and so forth. So for thousands of years, stories have stuck to humankind, civilization after civilization, but stories have really continued only because it has the elements of deep learning, which is visualization, imagination, thinking that's embedded in the moral concepts that stories offered. So today, our session, I want to start with a little story, which is appropriate. I have a friend, John. He has an antique store right here in Lake County in the northwest of Chicago. During COVID times, he fell into hard times. And it was difficult for him to sell the antiques, but people were not coming to visit. And the visits really played a big role. Visits to his shop played a big role because John was able to communicate the value of each of the antiques that he sold. He knew the history of each of the items, where he got from. He knew the story behind each of the item, which he communicated, and that convinced the buyer to buy. But in a COVID inflicted society where people were not coming to the store, he was in a big handicap. So what he did was he looked at all his merchandise in his store and collected those pieces that had some interesting stories behind them that he collected from the people that he bought it from. And then he hired some writers to write some stories behind each of the items and put them on eBay. Guess what? The items without a story sold at a minimal, but the items with the story really sold at a much higher rate, as the curve shows you. So what does that tell you? That tells you the story has some value embedded in them that really impresses and excites and really internalized by the reader. So let's define then what is a story. In the shortest form of story definition, I want to say the story is about things that have happened or that are happening or that happened that affect someone in a pursuit of a goal or a pursuit of an ambition, a pursuit of some kind of a tangible reward. That's a story. But it also, from a learning perspective, the story offers some internal changes, which is what our mythologies do, our classics do, and our stories do. The internal change that the story helps you realize. So from a business storytelling point of view, the main three pillars of the storytelling remain the same. You need some character, you need a conflict, and you need a resolution and a conclusion. But in our context of the definition that we just offered, you set the character in some kind of context. And the context could be a healthcare, it could be an industry, it could be insurance, it could be anything. You put the character in a context, and then there is a conflict towards pursuit of a goal. And then you conclude and you resolve that challenge and the conflict, and resulting in an internal change. This is the basic building block of stories. Now, along this framework, there are some characteristics of each story. The story must draw in the reader or the viewer or the audience, and then it must continue to hold his attention, and also it must progress toward the end, and it really be flowing smoothly. And in our case, in our training scenario, learning scenario, the story should be driven by some learning objectives. So if you really look at it from a core ingredients of a story, this is any story, a learning story or an entertainment story. What we have to establish, the core ingredient of a story, establish what the story is about, what it revolves around, who are the persons and what are the events. And the second is what is the context? Why are we talking about this story? What's the time, the place, and the purpose of these characters and the events in the story? We also have to create a goal and a problem and a concern and a conflict that will drive the movement of the story. And then the story is all about what happens. How does the characters deal with the problem? How is it related to some goals or objectives? And how the story concludes with a success or failure and why. And then finally, what are the takeaways? How does the story change with the audience internally? But from a business perspective, the business may require, if you really look from the left to the right, it could be a learning about increasing productivity, or it could be learning about increasing efficiency, or decision making, or the processing time, or improvement in monetary reward or cost. So these are all typical applications of learning in a business environment. Now let's superimpose that on the core ingredients. So our learning stories start with the learning objectives and with specific goals and specific outcomes. And then we have to identify specific challenges that it can be only mitigated by following certain rules. And these rules are the guides that the person or the group or the video or a book or a set of rules that really act as a guide to help the learner mitigate the challenge. And then from this guide, a plan is derived, and then the plan is executed to resulting in the success or failure. And that's the learning goal. And then the final analysis today, our analytics we can get from the success or the failure of the learner learning from this, what is the influence of the story on the learner. So this whole ingredients can be also presented in a curve form, which is called a plot diagram. And this plot diagram is equally valid for a creative story, the feature films, or a theater, or a novel, or a learning story. It's the same thing. What it is, it has a beginning, middle, and an end. In the beginning, you set the context and the goals. Then you introduce the challenges. Then the rising actions, it really sets up the external challenges and the internal challenges, going up to a climax where you meet the climax with some solution, and the solution is planned and implemented, resulting in a result that is internalized by the reader or the viewer of this plot diagram. But this plot diagram is not specifically, like I said, for learning design, but it's also a feature film, let's say. This is the typical feature of Titanic, let's say, or Gone with the Wind, or Spider-Man. They all have peaks and valleys, like the way from act to act to act, how the plot moves along in an up and down. This is something that I learned in school, and we had to create storyboards and storyline to following this kind of a action plan, following the plot. So, but here I want to differentiate between the entertainment stories and learning stories. What do the entertainment stories have, and what the learning stories have and don't have? First of all, the entertainment stories deal with, even if it's a historical movie, even if it's on war or a kind of a documentary, still entertainment is for entertainment and distribution of film, television, fashion, video. But the main purpose of that story is to sell to the audience, and that is the financial goal of the business. And the learning story is told by an educator with a specific purpose. And the story helps learner hear, see, know, and experience the sharply focused content and with a predictable outlet. And another important difference is in an entertainment story, you can skew the facts according to your viewpoint. If when you are doing a documentary on Gandhi, you can take some liberty with the situation because it was nothing but film. Most of it was not, it is recreated, and the recreated situation and the political turbulence and it's all, it's a margin between design, fiction, but adhering to some facts. But in learning stories, you cannot take those liberties. It has this, you can specifically interpret the story, the fact to in certain light, of the business interest of the company that's promoting this learning story. But the main objective of the learning story is to attain competence, and it mostly fall under nonfiction. So now, how do you create a learning story? That's our topic today. So a learning story has to deal with a challenge. It's mitigated in some manner within the story, and the unfolding action describes the problem and how the learner deals with the situation. That's really the basic building blocks that we just learned from learning perspective. But a learning story has some specific way of thinking, a research, and the way of building the story. It's called a disciplined inquiry. A disciplined inquiry is a term that's used in this kind of, it's really also something that's used heavily by journalists and by documentary filmmakers, people who are historical film. A disciplined inquiry is also very heavily used in research, where the researcher follows predetermined steps and adheres to professional tradition. It's a story research. It's very vital to creating a business story. And the disciplined inquiry can be done irrespective of the industry. As you can see in this picture, there's a medical profession, there's a service profession, there's an industry profession. Any story can be told with but what you need is a disciplined inquiry. Now let's see how do we build a disciplined inquiry? First point of disciplined inquiry is really you have to do a research. You have to use deliberate and transparent steps.
Hi, Kushal. Sorry to interrupt, Kushal. There's a lot of background noise coming from your environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just I just got a comment.
Can you excuse me
1 second?
1 second.
Okay. Yes, Tim. I was noticing the scraping as well. Sorry. Just.
Oh, okay.
I thought it would get better, but as it's progressively got worse, I think we will just allow Kushal to warn.
My apologies, the guys working on my deck, they're pounding some nails there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Kushal.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So continuing, so discipline inquiry starts with research of existing documents. That's the discipline inquiry. But moving on, the research really helps you conduct interviews with the subject matter expert. The main source of stories are the people who have lived through some kind of a experience. And without the research, you don't know how to ask an intelligent question. So with the research, you can ask the right question to the subject matter expert. And the discipline inquiry takes time for your research and in a precise, disciplined manner. And in some cases, what I do is I send them an advanced question to him, and then he can come prepared with some background information. And then once you have those answers to the questions and to the research, you have greater confidence in the stories when you are actually writing it. So this SME interview for a discipline inquiry is more of a guide than a recipe, but typically it has some process. So let me tell you the 7 steps that I follow to conduct a discipline inquiry. First of all, I try to videotape with the SME's permission everything that he or she says in the interview. And the 7 things is I plan, I research question and story themes. What am I thinking based on the research that I've done? I gather, record and assimilate the data that have come to find. I capture, organize the data very carefully. I categorize the data in different categories with pictures, if possible, and then they verify accuracy of the data. And then I go to the SME to seek insight about the relevance of the story to the corporation, to the objective that I'm trying to get. And then finally, at the end of the day, I get approval from SME for my accuracy of hearing what he has told me. So from this interview emerges a story. So that story is found in the following plan. First of all, I begin with a plan of alternative scenarios. I use a theme, and I use the shortened version of the research question and have with the target audience in mind, I have a plan and a strategy. Then I do my research. I make sure my SME understand that I've done my homework. I keep it simple, and then I try to find in my network, in the company network, who can help me, who has the title, who has been around, and then I ask for, and I also ask the colleagues and other SMEs for individuals who might have relevant experiences to share their experiences with me. That's how you find the story. And then I try to find the story in either in person or over the net. Sometimes food and beverages help to relax the person. I take my time, and I sometimes invite 2 or 3 people to this because they help each other remember the smile, and they share their stories together, from which a beautiful picture emerges. And then I also share my inquiries with my colleagues and my partners who also understand what I'm looking for. The team members, they can also find something that they get somewhere that they run into, they can refer that to me. And then finally, whenever I hear a story, I write down the key details and with the focus of the story, I write a skeleton and I share it back with the storyteller, and I usually have a video. But when I'm listening to the storyteller, I must pay particular attention to the key features of a story. And I am very careful and I'm very alert in reading and listening between the lines. And then I ask him a question about what was said. Because from a story perspective, I really want to have the details. And a lot of time, the details come from the description that he gives me about an event. And that's how the story unfolds. And then I also am very carefully listening for the problem or the challenge. The storyteller, the SME may not actually label it as a problem or a challenge, but I have to take clues and I look for some kind of a conflict. Remember, conflict of problems or challenges, the core elements for all stories. And then finally, I have to make it suspenseful or surprise or humor, what makes story interesting. So I asked this question, tell me about this problem, or what was so difficult? How was the challenge finally overcome? So this kind of story to make it interesting. So those are my way of that I have followed to find the story, from the resources that's available to me in a corporation. But then finding a story and the telling the story are two different things. Now let's see how we can take the story and actually help them story. So let's say these are my notes, and then I keep on drifting from one idea to another idea. But the important thing is this. This is the key essential ingredient of a good training story. When an instruction designer converges as a professional storyteller, there are two different skills, but in a deep learning environment, it is essential the instructional designer thinks like a storyteller. And we need both of these disciplines to have an interesting story. And here's some suggestion, how do you blend these two skill sets? Number one, I always, whether I'm doing a feature film or I'm doing a learning film, I always put ideas on a whiteboard and I shuffle things around so that I can visualize the story progressing. So I assemble the pieces for the story. It really creates a very crisp, clear, and the memorable experience. And oftentimes, most of the time, I start with the ending. What the takeaway? And how do I drive my story to the ending? So that takeaway, that the learning objectives actually drives my story. I put that in first. In fact, I start with the right-hand side. How do I want to end it? What the experience of the learner going to be at the end of the story? So, and then what do I have to develop to really get there? And then I come up with the challenges. How do I start this? How do I progress? And the first few moments of the story is extremely important and relevant to the entire story. Then I actually, once I write a skeleton, I try to make it interesting, provocative, and insightful. Then I share it with others in my team member. And then their input is great importance to me. And then I start with some phrases like this. Here's the story. And why am I even telling the story is something that I want to make sure that the learners in a learning environment knows why am I relying on the story. For example, here's something I learned when I'm listening to our customers. That's a story. Here's an example of how we do our work. That's another story. Here's a story that illustrates our research finding. And also something like some skills are of great importance to new employees. Let me tell you about John Smith. These are typical example phrases that I can start a story with. And then finally, after I'm done a skeleton, done the story, I really pay attention to its authenticity, validity, verifiability, relevance, and adherence to the discipline inquiry. I seek verification with my colleague, my client, my management to make sure that is something acceptable. I try to eliminate, not even go there to extremes. Any business boundaries I never cross. And then I step back, read it, record it, and experience it, and make sure it relates to the audience and learning goal. And then finally, when it's done, I test among audiences, individuals, and groups. So that's a linear storytelling, but today's technology allows you interactive storytelling, where the learner can choose, has choices, and he can approach the problem solving in different approaches. Learner can click through and make decisions along the way and impact the outcome of the story. So this interactive storytelling And there's also interactive video where you can take a path A or a path B. So these are very interesting technologies that are emerging today that allows the storyteller to branch in different ways and different topics. That's for another day. That's a lot more complex than what the linear storytelling that I just described. But at the end of the day, finally, what does the story mean to the learner? And Jean-Luc Godard, who is one of the most famous storyteller of all time, who just passed away a couple of weeks ago, he said that sometimes reality is too complex, which is true. Today's technology, processes, environment is very, very complex. Our society, our infrastructure, our business processes, our clients, our stories give it a form, a simplicity, something, a comprehension. I really believe this definition, very simple, yet very strong definition than the Godard followed throughout his life. So with that, I want to help you write your story. And I'm offering you 30 days at no obligation and no charge, my humble experience that I have learned over the years of telling stories in different organizations for different applications. And if there's any way that I can help you, you can click here and fill up a form, and then we will put you on our calendar, and then I will help you write your story, at least in my humble way, where I can, if I can help you in any way. Now I want to open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Kushal. Very, very interesting. Fantastic presentation on the difference, especially the difference between the, normal entertainment stories that we normally associate and these more business-related stories for learning for a specific outcome. I'm just going to share my screen and we can start the Q&A. 1 second. So we have a question here. These are a few questions that were submitted ahead of time, but as with all our other events, please just write your question in the chat, and then we will add it to this document, and then we can go ahead and we can assign your question to the correct panelist as we go. Tim Green just said, thank you for your generosity, Kushal. Please share the link. Absolutely, we will share the link with everyone, Tim. It will be on the slide deck, but we will also share it on the email as well. So you won't have to go into the slide deck. You'll just be able to click directly from the email that we send to everyone after this event. And we know we have a list of all the attendees from Zoom, Tim. So you and everyone else will receive an email from the same email that you used to log into this Zoom webinar. Okay. I hope that answers your question, Tim. So the first question, and please, like I said, everyone, don't hesitate. Just put your questions in the chat. The first question: what are the typical challenges to acquiring a story in a learning environment? So, Kushal, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I would like Mike Lynn to answer that, because I know Mike and I have worked on projects where it was difficult to make progress because the overlapping skills of instructional designer and a storyteller is sometimes not available in our organization learning environment. Mike, you want to address that? And the other part of the question is that how do you overcome and support the storytelling effort for someone who's trying to do that?
Sure. And Kushal, thank you for your presentation. You gave me so much more to think about. I think for all of us, we're here on our journey, right? As people who are trying to bring learning to our clients, our customers. And so in this perfect storm moment, we have this room of guides who can help us on that journey. So the question is, what are the typical challenges in acquiring that story? One of the main ones that I've seen as a challenge is that the business world believes that information is what gets things done. And in this complex world that Godard talked about, there's just lots and lots of information, and it's kind of an uncourageous thing to just share more and more information. Those that can cut through the information and connect it to an audience and connect it to the journey that their audience is on can put that information in the form of a story. And that could be true for persuasive communications, that could be true for sales discussions, that could be true for learning. Those of us in the room who are here because we know the power of the story are the ones that have to be able to find that and cut through all that clutter to get to the story at the heart of it. I had one other challenge. I'll refer to a story that was from 1999, The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. In the learning world, I think there's so much belief now that learning can happen in a way very similar to the movie The Matrix, where you could just plug yourself in, and I know Kung Fu. You're downloading lots and lots of information. We as learners know it doesn't work that way. We have to be able to talk to our audiences, our stakeholders, our buyers about how we are able to process that information on our learning journeys in a way that helps us grow and develop in an incremental way, not an instant way. Those are some of the challenges I'd see.
Thanks, Mike. Kushal, anything to add?
I want to add another perspective. It's a very important question. I would like to have Subhashish also give us his thoughts about answering this question, the typical challenges in a learning environment.
Well, I'm going to change the learning environment a little bit because I'm from the corporate world. So I feel learning is useful not only for typical educational reasons, but also making decisions. So in a corporate world, when you make a decision, an educated decision is much better than an impulsive decision. And that's where a little bit of the learning comes into picture as to any decision that you're making, not necessarily you know all about it, especially if you're in an executive role, most likely that you are being presented many information, and you have to make really a powerful decision out of all of that. What helps in that is somebody has to put a story together for that decision maker. And that story has to be so crisp, powerful, as well as impactful for that decision making, that nothing else can actually replace that. We actually use storytelling almost in every aspect of our corporate world nowadays to educate our sponsors, to fund an idea that we have about a product or a service, our buyers to really learn about what is a product or service going to do, and a story as to how that can connect with it. So I think that the challenge is in that environment are of different facets, but it's pretty much the same ability to tell a story that can convince. So I'm going to say, I saw your 3 C's, I've got 4 C's, that we can connect with our audience better. We need to tell a story. The only way you can best connect with your audience is a story, and that audience can be a sponsor, a buyer, somebody who is key to make a decision, a stakeholder. And the best way to connect, the first C, is tell a story. Because what the story does is contextualize, which is the second C, to help set that bridge from your idea to that world, all the information that they need to make that decision. And the third C is the most important, which is to communicate. Now you deliver the message, a product value, a business case, why we should do this versus why we should not do that. And then most likely the fourth C is convince, which by the way, as the story has already played that influential catalyst to hopefully make that convincing much easier. So I think those are the typical challenges in a corporate world, how to actually take a lot of information about making a very powerful decision and put that in a story that we can connect, contextualize, communicate, and convince the key decision makers.
Excellent, excellent. So what you're saying is that although my focus in this presentation was learning, but you're expanding from learning to actually business processes across the board to convince partners, clients, sponsors, employees in other aspects other than learning to really connect with them. And that's an excellent, excellent application.
It's learning. I would say it is a learning to make a decision. And it is not about learning to acquire a skill, which is primarily what you do or the presentation was all about. But there's a lot of learning that needs to be done to make a decision in a very short span of time. And that's where, the advantage of storytelling helps. Somebody who is convincing the decision maker with a story.
So Vashish, can I invite you to another webinar on that aspect of storytelling?
Oh,
Business
sure.
applications, so rather than my focus was learning, which is the world I'm from. But the world you're from is not only learning, but you're applying to a general business processes within the corporation. So that's a different subject and different discussion. Maybe I would love to have that.
And sorry about that, because I'm not very much into the educative part of the learning, but definitely I'm in the very much part of the decision-making part of making a learned decision. So that's why I try to connect it.
I'm really sorry that you're not educated about education, but we will get you there. We'll bridge the gap with stories. So anyway, what's the next question?
Fantastic. Thanks, Subhasis. Yeah, really interesting to get both Mike's and Subhasis' input. All right, so we've got two more questions coming up. So the first one, Stephanie, you can see it in the chat as well, but we just copied it over here. Are there certain types of people who are not as receptive to stories, or are stories persuasive on virtually everyone? For example, are there types of peoples or personality styles, roles who think stories are too fluffy and think you're wasting their time? Very interesting question. Kushal.
I would like Mike to try to address that if you would like, if you don't mind.
Certainly. Yeah, I think there's two parts to this question. If you're someone trying to persuade kind of hard-headed corporate executives about storytelling training, we need to build our storytelling skills with everyone here in our organization. It's going to be a hard sell for many of them. However, all of us that are here know the power of storytelling. And so we have to find a way to persuade even that audience by using stories. There's no audience that will hear a story that will not be pulled into it if it's done well. The classic story of we were here, then something really big happened and it changed, therefore we need to do this new thing is a classic recommendation, persuasive story that any executive, even the ones that may not like storytelling training, will be persuaded by. All of us here can think about ways that information can be changed into that story format, so that those people that might not be so inclined to learn how to tell stories will still receive and be persuaded by those stories. And then when they see all of us continuing to tell stories better, and then you say, by the way, what I just did was telling stories, they'll start to realize that this is something that they need to do. And I was very interested to hear, Subhasis, when you were talking about your work, you don't get to the point that you're at within your career in a corporate world without having come to that point of recognizing that storytelling is important. You might have recognized it early on, but I'm sure many of your peers probably did not, right? And it's sort of a sell internally that you have to make sure they know storytelling is vital.
But I want to argue with the questionnaire that implied in this question is a story is a fictional place. But stories are often built on facts, on data, and actual events. Let's say it's a safety story on safety. And I can tell you that what caused the unsafe condition that led to the story, that's based on totally fact. But I'm telling it in a way that captivates the imagination and the attention of the listener, how this all could be an electrical fire. What did he do wrong? I'm trying to recreate that event or the accident to really make the listener aware of that. I'm telling a story, but it's fact. So I think not all stories are based on fiction. So if somebody is opposed to accepting a story, then I think it's the fault of the storyteller because he's not established well enough that it is a fact that I'm going to be talking. This is exactly what happened. So that would be my take on it. And I don't think there are types of people or style who think stories are too fluffy. Stories don't have to be fluffy. The stories can be based on completely grounded on facts and data. I completely believe that. In fact, good percentage of my stories are always on fact. I am a very stickler for fact, and these are all facts-based stories.
Yeah. So I'll draw attention to what you said earlier, Kushal, about the beginning, the middle, and the end. And that middle, that conflict, that's something that's really hard to get past. In the stories, there's actually several conflicts, and those are the real facts. Those are the stories that people are experiencing that draw them to learning. They have to get past those conflicts, and the story can help them get from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Subhashi said. That conflict could be a business process conflict. It could be a sales conflict. It could be a challenge of multidimensional. It's not about learning a skill. It could be a challenge of different dimension. So I think that would be that's something to think about. So let's move on to the next question.
Maybe I'll add one more point here, because we many a time think stories are equal to fiction or made up, right? That's what the connection, that stories have got a bad connotation. You're making up stories. That's what. But in this context, what we are saying is a story that is a factual story. And I can tell you that in the corporate world where we build products and services, we generally build it on stories of someone's bad experience. That is a real story. And then we put a solution in place that says, that's exactly the experience we want to eliminate by a product or a service like this. And that is much more convincing than giving them the pros and cons of the solution, the financials of the solution. It immediately clicks with any executives when you say, 4 of your customers have left because of this kind of thing happened, and tell the story. Immediately, they're all over it.
I want to add one thing, that disciplined inquiry eliminates fluff. That digs out the story within the story, the facts and the data. So let's move on to the next question.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot. I just want to add as well from the comments. So Stephanie, who posed the question, she said, it's going to depend on how you approach the importance of the story and the impact. And then she agreed. So she said, yes. So she agreed with everything you said. So you guys convinced her. And then Tim, to you, Mike said, you hit the nail on the head, doing it meta, educate about stories via stories. Brilliant. So yeah, really, really, yeah, exactly, Tim. Use stories to educate about stories. I like it. Let's move on to the next question. So for 3, for a very short story, like in a post, is it possible to tell a story which powerfully compels readers to share what they learned about themselves and or their situation?
Excellent question. Mike, you want to take that? I think it's a fantastic question.
Yeah, and there's 2 parts of it. Again, if you're a writer trying to get a message out there, any story, any metaphor you can capture that feels like an interesting way to bring that story to your audience can be a way to really pull them in. I did an article once on problem solving, and I was inspired by a professional chef who was cutting up a pineapple. And there's the step-by-step process that they used to cut the pineapple. And because I was tuned into stories, I was able to say, we can make the connections between how to solve problems and how to cut a pineapple. The other part of the question is how to help compel your readers to their own action, to share what they've learned about themselves or their situation. All of these stories, you're doing your best to try to put the hook in the water. Here's another metaphor, and just catch the fish and bring them in. you'll know when it happens because your story has connected. You'll make that contact and whichever way it is. Maybe they respond to your blog. And if they're not, you could keep testing it, keep refining your storytelling approach to see if you're doing something that really compels them. And it's not just blogs, it's not just written, it's also in communications, conversations you're having. You're always refining what you're doing as a storyteller so that you could better compel people to action.
I want to add one little thing because to me, it's a very interesting story. A post is a real life experience of somebody who's putting it out there. To me, that's extremely valuable, a real life experience. You know, it reminds me of a series on Amazon Prime called Modern Love. This Modern Love series is based on actually New York Times posts that people have put about their own life stories, little posts to the Dear Abby type of thing. They really wrote to the editor on that post. And from those posts, little paragraphs, emerge 30-minute films, which are beautifully implemented in Amazon Prime. If you have time, take a look at that, Modern Love. Each one of those stories came from little posts, and they all have pregnant with ideas and stories. Continue with the next question, please. Wonderful question. I like that.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Question number 4. How are case studies, a popular learning tool, different from stories?
Subhashish, you want to answer that? Try to answer that? Or how are case studies different from stories?
I'll try to answer that in 2 ways. One is, I think case studies are more geeky form of a story. A story is generally presented in a more interesting manner with as Kushal was saying, maybe some humor added or some suspense added or whatever it is. Basically, a case study might be a little blah, but story is the same. Case study can be converted into a story with some touches, and that's where really the skill that Kushal was mentioning earlier about is needed. I might be a very good case study writer, but I may not be a good storyteller. So that is one angle. Is basically the nature, the difference between the case study and story from basic angle. The other part is like where it is used, what type of learning. A case study might be a very popular learning tool when you are trying to acquire a skill, because you might need to give, it's more like giving examples. The difference between an example and a story. I'm learning something, I'm learning a skill. Here are some examples given to me as case studies. That is fine. But when I'm not learning a skill, when I'm not trying to get an example, but what I'm trying to get is like the fact of what I'm trying to solve. How can I solve? What will be the most impactful way to do it? That's when a story takes a much more front row seat than a case study. So those are the 2 different angles I can think of between how a case study is different from a story.
Right. I want to add one little thing that in my presentation, I spent about a dozen slides on interview tactics of an SME. Really what you're trying to find out from the SME is some case studies, his life's experience in certain topic or subject. So you take the case study and build a story around it, adding your imaginary skill set, staying with the disciplined inquiry within the boundaries of this disciplined inquiry, but you take the case study and make a hook to hook the learner into believing, just like the antique seller put the stories, those are fact stories behind every antique item. Your case study is like the antique item, but you add a story to that antique item to help the reader or the buyer internalize some stories behind the item. To me, that's the difference between case study and story.
And have the powerful leaders, the powerful persuaders are the ones that can talk about those case studies. So they're telling the story. They're not just saying, look at this great case study that I wrote, or this set of case studies. You're trying to find a way to bridge it to that audience.
All right, let's go to the next one.
Okay, guys, so this is going to be the last question. Is there any storytelling software that helps you with writing a compelling story in a learning environment?
Okay, I can
Yes,
answer that question.
It is called Kushal Bose.
Yeah, well, there are many dozens of storytelling software available for the feature film market. There are software that even pushes ideas to you as you write a sentence or a plot or a scenario or a scene. The software will keep you asking, have you thought about that? What time of the day it was? How was the sky? How was the environment? Was it winter? So it really prompts you with lots of questions to nail down the story within the environment of the setting. But there's none that I know available for the real world of learning or skill building, storytelling. So I would say that there are lots and lots of storytelling software that you can download a free version of it, just to take a look at it, what kind of elements go behind the storyteller's writing when you're writing a story. What kind of questions do you must answer? So a person who has never written a story, it may be challenging at the beginning, but once you start writing, but remember, there's one sentence that I want to repeat that I presented there. Story lies in between the lines, a lot of times in descriptions from the SME. When he was going to work that day, the sky was dark and it was about to rain. And then he arrived at the work site, at the job site, etc., etc. So SMEs recall from their memory the situation and that really he's trying to describe and share with you. A lot of times, these are the key that you have to note down and build a story from there. That's all I can say. Mike, you want to add something?
Just a quick comment. As you mentioned, we're in this time where technology is evolving so much, and there are so many ways that you can put the pieces of a story together compellingly with visuals and graphics and sound. But I'd encourage everyone here to look for those that allow interactivity, because the stories that we're talking about, as Kushal mentioned, are the ones that people are on their own journeys already. And if we could give them those pieces of that journey and they can engage in the way that they want to, they're on the learning journey themselves. So don't just view it as a one-way push of learning. Find a way to have that engaging, collaborative story forming with the people who are the learners.
Fantastic. Any other questions, Evans?
Thanks. We're gonna have to. We've already gone over, Kushal. So this is gonna have to be the last question.
Yeah, let's wrap it up.
Absolutely.
I have to leave. I have got another meeting at top of the hour. So
Subhashish,
nice
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. I'm
Thank you so much for
welcome to join the
everything,
next one.
Subhashish.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead. What's the next question?
So Kushal, I think let's wrap it up, but let's first Bahar, is there anything, Bahar, would you like to add anything about the software element? Because I know that's your area, Bahar.
I want to ask a question to Bahar. Bahar, as you know, in a learning management system, which is your special expertise, and you have been developing e-learning and learning modules for 20 years, and plus you have a master's degree in electronics technology. But my question to you is simple, that when, especially in a virtual reality or interactive learning, where it's an immersive learning, you're telling a story, but the learner is actually taking his own decision, choosing his own path, learning path. Is there a way for the learning management system to capture the movement of the learner, the input of the learner into a LMS, and then analyze what did the learner, how did he react for example, if you're talking about a simulator, airplane flight simulator, when the pilot is facing in the simulator a storm, a snowstorm, or an engine falling off, there's a fire, what is reaction? What does he do first and second and third? These are important data that helps us analyze the mindset of the pilot in an emergency situation. So does our LMS today analyze the data that outputted from the headset into the LMS that we can later analyze and drive conclusions and take action plans from?
Yes, definitely we can do that. So it depends upon the package which we will be developing for the storyboard. Okay, so there are various software available. One is like articulate storyline. Okay, so once we create that package, or maybe we can, if we have that learning object, then we can import that into the LMS, and then the SWARM package talks with the LMS. Okay, it sends some kind of data like whether the user has taken the correct path or not, or whether he has answered some question correctly or not. Okay, and based on that, the LMS can capture those variables. Yeah, and from the VR set also, yes, we can export the data to our LMS. So for that, we need to export JSON file, which we can export in our LMS, and then it tells about what there were 10 steps which an user need to do. Out of that user has done 8 steps correctly and 2 steps wrong. So that data can be captured into our LMS. Yes.
So in other words, our Teledec LMS, which you run, can record the retina movement or in head movement, or you're looking up or down, something is happening to the right, but you're looking to the left, or using the wrong tool for the wrong job.
Yeah.
All of these can be captured and recorded in your LMS. That's what you're saying, right?
Perfect. Yeah, we need to program it accordingly, and after that we can capture those movements.
Okay. All right. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
As we're ending, I want to draw attention to
please,
that comment in the chat that said that Kushal is brilliant and lovable. As you go through you're learning about stories, you learn about the mentor character who typically is brilliant and lovable, and Kushal described him very well.
Oh,
absolutely.
thank you,
So
Mike.
thanks, Dave. Yes, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Dave, for the comment, and thanks, Mike, for bringing it to everyone's attention. So we're already 6 minutes over, and I know how busy everyone is, so I'm just going to wrap this up. First off, thank you to everyone who came, and if you're watching this recording, thanks for watching the recording. Secondly, thank you to all the panelists. Thanks to Mike for coming on. Great addition. Bahar for repeat, and Subhasis, who just jumped off. Thanks to Kushal as well for putting this presentation together. Kushal, like as Dave said, he's brilliant and lovable, and he really spends a lot of time putting these presentations together to give as much value as possible to the audience. And,
I want to thank.
so thanks a lot, Kushal.
I want to personally thank Chris behind the scene. I can see the TL
Yes.
and not his face, but Chris is a very important part of our team and who is actually driving the questioning into our screens. So thank you, Chris.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
So these recordings for the session, for people who are interested, are available in our Teledec YouTube channel, or it's going to be downloadable from our site. Both.
Absolutely. So we'll send you the recording on Zoom. We'll also upload to the YouTube channel. And yes, and it will be on our website, as you said, Kushal. So you guys can't miss it. The replay will be very, very easy. So the YouTube channel ID is just Teledec International. We'll send that as well, Jason. So Jason, with the email that you just sent before, we'll send you the YouTube channel link along with our LinkedIn URLs. Another thing, I think it was Stephanie asked me to send everyone's LinkedIn URL because she'd like to connect on LinkedIn as well. So we'll be sending a bunch of links via email. Please let us know, guys, if you don't receive that email, because I'm just thinking now with the amount of links that we're putting in the email, I don't know about the deliverability. It might go to the spam. But you should receive it, and let us know if you don't. info@teledec.com. And then we'll be happy to resend it or send it to you can check the spam or something like that. All right, let's wrap this up.
Thank you. You did a wonderful job again. And I hopefully next month, if you have any suggestions for our next webinar, please let us know. Mike, you can come up with. Actually, we have a schedule already published in our website. Every month for the next 12 months, we have already, but we can change it to something that's more relevant. And if you have some ideas, please let me know. Let us know.
Fun. Yeah. Good journeys,
Absolutely.
everybody.
We're very
May the
flexible.
force be with you, and follow the yellow brick road.
Bahar, you've been up all night. This is like what, 3:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot. But you're an inseparable part. Being a Teledec CEO in India, I'm hoping that we'll talk soon when you're more relaxed.
Definitely so. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Ivan. Okay. Bye bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.